Well, do not on the lesson plan.
This is a podcast for the movers, shakers, and misfits in education, helping you understand that education isn't just one path. And I want to support teachers with the range of different steps that they can take both inside and out of the classroom to support the next generation. This episode is going to delve into a range of different income sources, more specifically, my income sources, because I thought this would be an interesting point to look at this stage of the year. Before we start the episode, I wanted to take the time to say a huge thank you to every single one of you who have supported the program, the channel, the podcast so far. It's been a huge privilege to see all the different messages that you guys have sent me, supporting what we're trying to achieve, and the different ways in which you've supported that I didn't even know you could. We've had reviews. I didn't know you could review a podcast, but we've now got more reviews than Offset, which feels like a bit of a win. So if you've taken the time to review, or if you're listening to this, feel free to do that if that's something you can, because it really helps in more ways than you realize. And if you haven't taken the time to subscribe yet, I know that there's about 98% of people who listen to this and view this haven't yet done that. So feel free to do that too, because it really helps me understand that I'm on the right path to supporting teachers with theirs. So let's delve into income sources. Now, I heard a statistic recently that the average millionaire has 7 sources of income. I have more sources of income than that, and I can tell you that I am no way near a millionaire, so I'm not really sure where that's come from. I feel like I've been collecting income sources a bit like collecting infinity stones. I think there's 5 or 6 infinity stones, but yeah, like I've exceeded that, and that gives you an idea of where this episode is going to go. On the flip side, I also heard a statistic recently that sort of says that the most likely professions to be a teacher, number 1 is accountant, number 2 is lawyer. That makes sense because of the finance and the law and the loopholes, etc. Number 3 is teacher. That blew me away, but it also makes sense because I think that teachers do a tremendous job of sales, of relationships, and all the things that you need to do to build, essentially. So, I mean, what I hope this episode does is inspire you and maybe think of different ways that you could perhaps build your own income streams. This, in no way, shape, or form, I really hope it doesn't come across as a gloaty episode. I'm using this as an opportunity to reflect, but yeah, like I mentioned, I earn a very average income, just lots of different ways, through part-time bits, through my own bits. So we're going to delve into that. To give you some context of where I'm at the moment, I'm in my office, obviously, but it's both kind of like philosophically and to kind of give you an overview of perhaps my history. I taught in the UAE, came back to the UK, but as part of coming back to the UK, got married. And then, this was in 2024. My wife and I decided to go on this amazing honeymoon after we got married. We went to South America and we had just the most amazing time exploring and different bits and pieces. It didn't quite work out the way I wanted to, as I explored in episode 1. But we kind of decided that if we didn't do it then, we would perhaps never do it because of maybe children in the future, fingers crossed, or, perhaps some sort of, if we came back when we're older, we wouldn't travel in the same way. So we just decided we'd do it, and then we came back. And so when we came back end of November, as I'm filming this, it's kind of around the same sort of time, November, hence why it's a really good reflection point. It was this kind of, right, now what? I was kind of twiddling my thumbs. I'd spent lots of money on the honeymoon and kind of moving back. And it was like, right, I've set up a business. Let's get it working. So that was a real turning point for me, really, to try and make things work as much as possible. And as I film this, I can say, I can't say it's fully worked, but I can say it's definitely working, which is a huge privilege. So the aim of this podcast is to explore different things, different income sources. And as you can see behind me, I've got this whiteboard. You'll see this whiteboard feature in lots of different episodes. And the aim of using the whiteboard, because I'm aware that different people will be listening to this as well, is for me to visualize it. If you're watching this, great. If not, I'm going to explain it so that you don't need to watch things, and it will be really clear in terms of the percentages that I share and going through. So yeah, we're going to start off by rubbing off a whiteboard, which is always annoying midway through a lesson, but we're going to use a range of different pens. The pens are going to be used to
demarcate, to mark out the different income sources that we're going to be talking about today. In my head, there are kind of three. People would say there's two different types of income sources. You've got your active that we're going to go into in red. You've got your passive that we're going to go through in blue. And then you've got something that I like to call true passive. And true passive, we're going to go in green because that's an interesting one to talk about. Because I have my own thoughts and feelings on passive income, like we'll talk about in this podcast. So to start off with, we need to draw this pie chart. I'm going to try and separate it out in a pie chart. I hate modeling using a pie chart. The biggest bane in my life is to try and draw one.
So what I'm using at the moment, for those of you that can't see, is a placemat from downstairs in the kitchen.
And if my wife saw me using this at the moment, she'd probably, oh, that looks good. So that's actually come out really good.
Makes me realise that, makes me think about, teaching. What would you use to draw your big circles on the board? Because let's be honest, we all had something that we would draw around. I like to have...
I just used to freehand it, if I'm completely honest. I'm not going to promise you and say like, oh,
I used to do this, that, and the other. No, I used to wing my circles. And if I managed a good circle, that the class, depending on their age, would be like,
whoa, you were insane. Whereas if I flopped it, they'd be like, So for Venn diagrams and stuff like that, yeah. But nowadays, there's lots of different technology that you can use. So we're going to talk about income streams. I think the hardest thing for me to do is to model the use of the pie chart. I used to hate teaching pie charts because it's quite a difficult one to get right. So to start off with, we're going to talk about active income streams. Active income streams are the streams of income where you basically trade your time for money. I always think about my first teaching. It's not my first teaching job, although it did teach me a lot of lessons. McDonald's. I literally clocked in. You had a code, clocked in. I'm wondering if anyone else taught in McDonald's, worked in McDonald's, clocked in, you had your code, and then when it came to break time, you clocked back out and you had your little free meal. But that was literally the time I was on the floor or in the restaurant was the time that I would be paid for. That's your active income. Teaching's a bit of a weird one in the way that you're paid for a certain amount of time, but you always have to work overtime. So when you compare it to McDonald's, you didn't get that. You did get that overtime at McDonald's, but not in the way that you would in teaching. You don't get any teaching. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. To start off with, we're going to separate this out. We're going to start off, because this is a teaching podcast, by talking about, oh, here we go. Watch me rub all of this off. Be very prepared for this to all rub off. When we look at this, we've got our first source of income. I'm going to colour that in red. And like I said, we're going to talk through teaching income. Now, teaching represents, and this feels crazy to say, 2.5% of my overall income.
Those of you who don't know, I'm a supply teacher at the moment, and supply teaching since coming back has been quite dry. It's taken me a little bit more time to set things up. I've obviously had lots of different holidays, whether it's half terms, Easter terms, summer holidays that have blocked out certain time. When we come back from a holiday, typically teachers aren't off. So I've found that supply teaching, I've spoken about it in depth on my YouTube channel. It's been really interesting to see that, the times that are available aren't necessarily the times that you're going to have as a supply teacher. So it's been really important for me to have those additional sources of income. Could I have done more teaching, and would I like to be doing more teaching? Yes, of course. I can still say I'm wearing my teacher hat because I have been in classrooms. However, yeah, of course, it would be nice to be going into classrooms more. For context, I only teach 2 days a week, or in fact, I'm only available 2 days a week. So that's certainly an interesting one. Yeah, teaching's been really interesting because it's given me a really good understanding and experience of going into a range of different schools and kind of exploring different things. But for it to be 2.5%, it was a little bit of a shock to me. I definitely, if you'd have told me last November that you'd only be doing that amount, I would be absolutely baffled. I suppose it is what it is. It is what it is. So next, we've got the next one. I've already done the speaking. And that is also 2.5%. What do I mean by speaking? Not now. I'm speaking and I'm not getting paid for this.
by speaking, I mean speaker fees. So if a company contacts me and says, will you speak about XYZ? Will you come and do some sort of webinar? Will you come and speak on a stage? I charge a speaking fee, a speaker fee, and yeah, so public speaking, which is a bit of a weird one for me to kind of go, wow, that is an income source. And it represents similar sort of income to teaching, which is crazy. So yeah, I have kind of different things that I get involved with and have that speaker fee. To be able to do speaking, that's kind of an income stream, I suppose, for you guys that you might be intrigued in, because lots of you will do kind of public speaking of some sort when you do your assemblies. Those of you who are in some sort of leadership will naturally do this in front of both staff and children and parents. So you're able to kind of call on that experience. And if you have a specific area of interest, even if that area of interest is something that's related to the school, so let's say you are passionate about education technology, like me, leadership, special educational needs and disabilities, all those different elements that you would typically find in schools, you can branch off and you can start to explore different opportunities from that. And sometimes when it comes to speaking, if that's something that you're interested in, you'll find that when you have conferences, there are different education technology companies who are always really intrigued by people who are using their products and projects. And you'll find that sometimes you can go to certain conferences and different education companies need people to come speak about their tools, you know, kind of as that user generated content. You might find that they'll pay you, and in other ways they might pay for your accommodation, your transport, so you're not at a loss coming to these events. And that's definitely how I started with my speaking. I went to different education conferences. I've spoke at depth in a range of education conferences just for free. Dubai was one of those places that actually didn't pay you, which is quite interesting, for doing public speaking bits and pieces. It's not a common thing. So I did loads of different voluntary bits, different conferences. I'd give up my Saturdays to go and do that. So now to be able to go, right, I can charge for public speaking and to go and do those things, it's still not something I'm particularly an expert at, but it is a fantastic thing that I can kind of turn around and say, cool, that's something I can charge for. So yeah, we'll move on. We will move on to the next one. But this represents a huge chunk of my income, and I'm going to color this one as much as I can. You'll see that I'm just before the halfway line here. Yeah, that is consultancy. So consultancy represents 40% of my income overall, and I would say that that is probably a representation of the large majority of my active income time. It's a large majority of my week, and it really is a privilege to be able to say that that is that number and that is what I now do. How do you get into consultancy? Well, time. I've been a content creator now for 8 years. 8 years, really. I've been creating content on a range of different platforms. I started on YouTube. You might be watching this on YouTube. Then I branched out into other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and all the rest of it, LinkedIn. And as part of that process, I've just been learning and making mistakes and trying things and testing. And I've just played, really. But because of that play, I've learned all sorts of different things. And now I'm in a privileged position where education companies are kind of looking at what I do. They've seen that I've grown platforms and kind of think, right, well, how can that apply to us? And I'm in a really cool place where I can then go to different businesses and essentially help them with growing their company using a range of different strategies that I've learned. So I've got kind of two income streams delved into one with this consultancy work. Consultancy is essentially where you give up. There's different ways of doing it. With me, it's you give up a certain amount of time, so it's a day, to work on a company's certain goal. So for me, it's social media typically. It might be other things. And then I've got my other element where it's certain days where I'll go and do education technology workshops and
helping education technology companies with
photography and videography and different bits and pieces like that. So there's obviously the knowledge that I've gained from social media, but there's also the equipment, like my photography equipment and bits and pieces like that, that are useful to other people. And because I've got my education head, if I go to education technology companies while they're doing perhaps a workshop and they're doing bits and pieces, I know where to go, who to help. And what's nice is when they're doing these education technology like workshops, and whether it's STEM bits and pieces like that, I have a teaching background, so that, you know, if they're busy with another child somewhere while I'm doing my kind of social media hat and having that hat on, I can then help children as I'm going around as well. So that's a really cool thing. Whereas other social media people that people might hire, I'm not able to do that in that way. So yeah, that's been a really cool opportunity to get into. In terms of getting those kind of roles, luck. I'd say a lot of this is luck, but this one in particular is luck. I've not done any outreach. One person I met when I went to an event and went to a Canva event in Manchester, and it just so happened at the end of it, I bumped into this person, and this person was like also from my area, and they did lots of different EdTech workshops and stuff. And so we spoke, and yeah, that's been one element. And other people have been contacts that I've had from in the past, but way before I taught in Dubai. And then another one was just the person that I met from social media, and they happened to see my stuff. I'd been using their products loads in the past. So yeah, that's my active income. And my active income doesn't actually make up 50% of my overall income, which is phenomenal, which is crazy. And a real privilege. So consultancy is definitely something that you can start to kind of dip your toes into, and you'll find that with a lot of this, the more you do one thing, the more other elements start to branch out. So now we need to build into and talk about the next one. Now, this is a bit of a hard one. In theory, this shouldn't take up, that shouldn't be 50% yet. Okay, my next income source, as I've drawn on the board, is my first passive source of income, and that is AdSense. AdSense is what YouTube calls the revenue that they get from advertising that they then pay to their creators. AdSense is such an interesting source of income. It's the golden source of income. I will get revenue, whether it's pennies or pounds, who knows in the future. Whether it's pennies or pounds, I'll get a little bit of income that comes from each video that you create, because videos, YouTube videos, content in general are assets. And that's something that I do within my consultancy, is try to tell people that the videos that you produce are essentially assets that you can utilize again, repurpose, and that they will pay you. So the way that AdSense works is really quite interesting. Companies will pay a certain amount to advertise on specific videos. Now, certain categories are worth more than other categories. For example, finance and tech channels can receive more in AdSense per 1,000 views than perhaps lifestyle or travel videos. So that's really interesting for me as, you know, Teach Travel Triumph. I've created teaching EdTech videos, and I've also created kind of travel Dubai type of videos. And the EdTech videos, the AdSense that I get from there can be significantly more than the teaching, travel-y types of stuff. And that's a really interesting kind of topic of discussion, because then you start to go, right, well, surely you just lean into the tech videos. And there's the enjoyment factor. I enjoy making the travel types of videos. But you will find that there are lots of channels who pop up. If you're looking at making a YouTube channel for the financial side of things, which is a good takeaway, well, look at those higher profitability niches. So you've got things like CPM and RPM. CPM is what's called cost per melee, and that's the cost to the advertiser per 1,000 views. So that might be $20 for a niche. Then you've got your RPM, which is revenue per melee, and that's the amount that the creator gets per 1,000 views. And typically that works out to be about kind of 50%. It's not always that case. So let's say I've created a nice tech video that's really high demand, then I'm getting 1,000 views, let's say, come from that video. I receive £10 for that 1,000 views, because they have, you know, that's the value that's placed on that. On the flip side, that might be just $5 or pounds for a travel video, because it's worth less. So it's really interesting to kind of delve into that, and it makes you think, right. But AdSense is a really, really cool one because it's the one that you just kind of, it is to an element of you make the video, and yeah, I've got videos that I made 3-4 years ago that are just ticking away in the background. They make me pennies. And that's a funny story, actually. I remember when I first started my my videos and bits and pieces like that, I said to someone, they were like, oh, are you making money from your videos? This was about 3 and 4 years after I'd even started creating. So that's something to remember. When you create YouTube videos, you're not going to get paid for a long amount of time. So don't start a YouTube channel. Don't start a YouTube channel with a view of making money. Start a YouTube channel because you enjoy adding value and creating videos. So yeah, this person said, are you making money from it? And I said, yeah, I'm making pennies. I've got my first paycheck, and it was like, I don't know, 50p. I didn't actually get it in my account, but that's what was in the account at the time. And they were like, pennies makes pounds. And I remember him saying that. And it was like, roll on a few years later, I started getting significantly more, let's say, than 2.5%. I'm on a real downturn at the moment with AdSense, but I've had AdSense months where it's in, the thousands. Then I've got these months at the moment where it's, definitely not that. But AdSense is a great one because the more you create content, the more valuable that is to people. The more people watch your content, the more that grows, and it just kind of grows. And if you do things correctly, the more other bits grow too. When we speak about AdSense, I've typically just spoken about YouTube. You also have the other platforms like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Instagram doesn't pay people anything, but it is a really good platform to use because of the social elements. Facebook has started paying people for content, and that is content just in general, not videos, just content. So I get paid from Facebook for pictures. I posted some photos of me and my, I'm started a new season of basketball, and I was like, yeah, and this is cool. I got my new uniform, new team. So I got paid a little bit from that. Like, oh, that's really cool, because that has never happened. LinkedIn, no, although that would be really cool because I'm sure they're getting lots of money from the advertisers. TikTok, me and TikTok, oh my gosh, we have a bit of a feud. We have so over the years I've had millions. I've got about 96,000 followers on TikTok as it stands at the moment, and as you can imagine, that is millions of views. And what do I have in return? I have cup placeholder things and a few other bits and pieces like that. I am a little bit frustrated that only certain places around the world can have money come from the adverts because they'll charge it. And I guess my frustration, you'll say like, oh, well, you weren't getting paid from TikTok, but does it matter? You're still getting the views. Well, it matters to me because they're still showing the adverts on TikTok regardless. So even though I'm not getting paid from those adverts, they're getting the money. And I'm the one that's helping them get those adverts on there because I'm generating the view. So it's taken me absolutely ages and lots of back and forward, but eventually I was able to convert my UAE TikTok into a UK TikTok, which is a whole technical thing. And I made a TikTok video about it, but I now get paid a few pennies each month from TikTok. I am still a little bit sore that I didn't get the videos and the views and the revenue from the millions of views that I had when I was in Dubai, but I'm there now. So I've got TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook each month now paying me a little chunk of money that, in theory, I wake up and receive. But at the end of the day, a bit like everything within the blue passive income thing, passive income isn't necessarily passive because you still have to do lots of little bits and pieces, lots of work, lots of elements to try and help that grow. Okay, we now move on to the next income stream, and that is, I'm going to be honest with you, this is a hard one to try and delve into because I want to say it's blue, but it's not really. If I'm completely honest, it is a red active source of income. So I'm going to mix it. I'm going to keep it almost like a purple. Bit of blue, bit of red. And that is, I'm going to even write it in red like the other ones. So we've got sponsors. Sponsors
represent 25% of my overall income. Sponsors are a fantastic opportunity for creators. The more you start to generate content and the more you start to generate different views, the more companies realize that that is a fantastic opportunity too, from a marketing perspective. And the reason that is, if you think of education companies, one of the biggest ways that they will advertise is through something like conferences. Conferences are fantastic opportunities because of the depth of understanding that people get to have with a product. Conferences, however, are extremely expensive, both for people who actually attend the event, you know, thinking about transport, thinking about accommodation, thinking about all those different bits and pieces, but also to the companies, because the companies have to pay a huge amount in terms of the fees to be at the event to showcase their product. Now, you might have it where you've had the opportunity to kind of go and speak at one of these, as I've spoken about speaking and things like that. But companies then, at the end of a conference, that's it. You know, you might get a little bit of traction from those things, but that's the end of the conference. It's the end of the person being able to kind of interact with your product, to play with it. And as a result, companies are always looking for different ways to advertise. So obviously they'll look at advertising on social media platforms through paid marketing, but then they'll go a bit more direct nowadays through something like sponsors. Because if you think you're at an event and you're advertising at an event, you might be getting, I don't know, 10, 20, 30,000 people come to your stall. Some creators are getting that video. Some people are getting that way more than that video. For myself, thinking about that number, I'm able to pull that across the platforms. So I might get 20,000 on one platform, I might get a little bit more on a certain other platform. And like, you know, if I've got LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all these platforms that I've said that, you know, some of them pay AdSense, some of them don't, they are views, and those views are individuals who are interested in the products that you create, and those things that you create, the videos that you create, and they're interested in you as a person. So if you've got something you're advertising to someone, they're likely to tune into that as well. Big but, this is a big but about sponsorship. You should only take on the things that align with your viewers. I've had some unbelievable, and I mean unbelievable, offers in the past. I've had some like offers come from crypto companies, from different banks, and different I've had makeup brands reach out to me in the past. That would be an interesting one. I've even had a pet brand reach out to me to see if I wanted to do something about pet. I mean, I know I'm, you know, sometimes look a bit rough, but do I look like a dog? Nowadays, though, now I'm back in the UK where my mum and dad have this cute little dog called Kizzy. I'm thinking, well, maybe that would work. But no, you don't take those things on because they don't align with your brand. And as a result, it creates a disjoint. Not only would it not work for the brand, it wouldn't work for you as a person. And as a result, people might interact with that content. You know, if I created a pet brand advertisement, they might interact with it. They might see it, but they're not going to they're not interested in buying from that brand, you know? So with sponsors, it's really important that you think about, right, is this something that my viewers, my people, the people who invest their time into my content are going to be interested in? Is it something that they're going to use? Is it something that I know other teachers use and found useful in the past? That's something I sometimes struggle with, because sometimes they'd be like, oh, do you want to try this software? And my school already used an alternative software, but I knew that other teachers use this software. You know, people who were close to me use the software and find it really interesting and useful. So I'd sometimes like interview other teachers and be like, is this something you think would be worth showcasing on my page? And, you know, that's one way of making sure that there's that alignment there. So it's really, really important. I'd even say crucial to make sure that there's that alignment there. But sponsors are they're passive in the way that once that's set up, the views come in and that's what the sponsor's interested in. But most of it is active. There's a whole lot that goes into sponsorship. There's the initial email, there's the initial pitch, there's working out the right rates, there's then creating the content, sending the content onto the client. Sometimes that's sending back and forward of like, this is what the content looks like. It's not quite right. That can be like 4, 5, 6 different times. The best companies are the ones that know that you have an audience that are invested in the content that you create and just go with it. Whatever they're doing, I had a company speak to me once and said, like, we were so interested in you as a person. We knew that
whatever you were doing, we just wanted to be involved with it, and we didn't want to have too much creative control over what you were doing, because other than like maybe branding and stuff, because that's what people were interested in. That's always the one that works. I've had other brands in the past that are like, we want to change this and we want to change that, and in the end it ends up being this Frankenstein video that doesn't resonate with viewers. But that's beside the point. Sponsorships are active because it's a lot of time, investment, and work. I put it into this category because it kind of is associated with the whole kind of creator ethos, and that being a creator, if that's a little bit different. But it's a big part. It's a big chunk. And because I have the views, and like I mentioned, different companies are always interested in finding out ways that they can advertise with other people, that they can, these conferences come around once, so they want to know what other ways are there that we can try and get in front of people and let people see what we do. So that's a really good opportunity. I think what sometimes people get kind of too invested in is like just doing sponsored content. If every post that you do is an advert, then people don't know why to follow you. And you are the product of what you say no to more than you are yes. So by saying no to those different brands that didn't align with me, that shapes the foundation of my content, essentially. So it's really important that you have that kind of default normal content, the content that gets you the AdSense. And then, your few sponsors that come through it, because you can dilute the attention that you get too. Because people are like, right, what are you actually sharing? Are you sharing this because you're interested in it as a person, or because the brand's paying you? So that's the really important thing to remember. So the next one, we get into the smaller percentages now, and it's a bit harder to kind of visually represent. So
I'm optimistically saying that's about right. That is another passive income stream. That passive income stream is digital products.
And that is 12.5%.
Digital products are me, myself, my digital products. This is probably the prime place for a bit of an ad placement. I don't have sponsors on this podcast, but I do have a business, and you can support that business by going and checking out the different products that I create. I create different guides to support teachers with things like teaching abroad and using technology to effectively help you save time and to make your lessons more innovative. And that's available on teachtraveltriumph.com. Thank you to me, myself, and I for sponsoring this podcast. So yeah, it's a really interesting one, digital products. I found that when I started doing it myself, like I said, sponsors are really keen to get in front of people, but you have that viewership yourself. So it's important to remember that it's probably better to advertise your own stuff than someone else's, in theory, unless it's something that you can't generate yourself. For example, there's digital software and big fancy hardware that I know that I can't just create myself. So that's the type of stuff that I sponsor, and I try and create the other stuff myself. So when it comes to digital products, it fits in cases like ebooks. I'm going to see if I can find an example of said ebook. So this is the second guide that I created. This is my moving to the UAE guide. I've got the first one here. This was my getting your teaching job in the UAE. Those were kind of the first digital products that I created, because I had loads of different questions from different people who were always asking, how do I do this? How do I do that when it comes to teaching in the UAE? The guide eventually became a thing after my friend unfortunately lost his job. There were lots of cuts going around in the UAE, and yeah, my friend got affected by that. So we sat down, I can tell you exactly where, more the Emirates Shake Shack. I had probably a chicken shack and some coffee, because their coffee was really good. And we sat down for about 3 hours. We ended up being there, lots of coffee. And we sat and we spoke about what he would need to do to get the teaching job, what the CV needed to look like, what they would probably ask in the interview if he had one, what he would need to think about. And we were there for ages talking about all sorts of different things, and obviously going off in different tangents. But at the end of that meeting, we then headed our separate ways, and I thought, I didn't tell him about what you could expect with a teaching lesson, what to do during that lesson, for example. I didn't tell him about this thing or that thing. So we then voicemail back and forward. It's like, if only I had something that I could point him towards, or my closest friend, give him. And that was true for other people who would then reach out to me and say how do I, how much money do teachers get paid in Dubai? What's the pros and cons? What's this? What's that? So it became a thing. I'm holding it up. It became a guide that I then went on to write, and eventually people were interested in buying that. Because I was creating so much content, I create content that people are so heavily invested in. I am in a privileged position that I create some content that people charge for. Like the YouTube videos that are available on my channel are the types of stuff that people charge £30 for people to watch. So because I'm giving that away for free, they're like, okay, what he does behind the scenes, it must be worth it. You know, if he gives that away for free, then goodness, what will the paid stuff be? And I always try to think that when I'm creating a digital product, that it has to be of substantial quality. I can't just get away with flogging rubbish, because some people do that, and that's just an ethical stance of my own. So yeah, that's what that became, and I started to share that on my own website, like I mentioned, and I was able to showcase that and talk about that in my different videos. It's something I probably don't do enough. I don't necessarily talk about my own products enough. I talk about all sorts of different tips, and I think that just speaks to the fact that teachers are so used to giving stuff away for free, giving away their time for free, giving away all sorts for free, that yeah, they're not necessarily good at saying like, pay me for X. And it's something that I've had to get better at as I've, built a bit of the business. So I've got different guides. I've got my guides to support with Teach Abroad. Teach Abroad Atlas eventually came. I had a guide to support student teachers with getting their first job. That's always the cheapest guide that's available on my website. And then I think, student teachers, etc. Then I've also got a few other little bits like a budget tracker type thing, and I've also got a few different certificate templates. They're also quite cheap. But then I've also started to delve into the world of edtech, AI. I think when it comes to generating your own stuff, that's one that can always build up and be bigger. At the end of this, we'll speak about that and how, perhaps ways that I can build that up and be a little bit better with those things. But like I said, sponsors have an interest in your channel because they know that the views bring value. Make that value yours by selling your own stuff is my lesson from digital products. So that represents 12.5% of my overall income. Super interesting one, but it is a passive income source, but it's not at the same time, because in theory, sometimes I'll wake up, I haven't advertised something for a while, and I'll get a sale. I've obviously come down some sort of funnel that I've created through the content, through the emails, etc. And generate. But there's so much that I have to do in terms of, or create a video about the fact that these things are available. Like, guess this is, in some ways, I will create emails that go out. So there's always something that you can do to advertise your products. And as a result, you could point it more towards that active stream of income. Next income source. Okay. The next income source is 100%. It's an affiliate income source. So it's affiliates. And it represents 5%. Affiliate income streams are an incredibly interesting one. I've got a product here that I am an affiliate for. So this is Positive Teach Company. If you use code Thomas15, I think it is. If you use Thomas15, you'll get 15% off Positive Teach Company planners. That's an example of an affiliate scheme. So you'll have to use a link that I got in description, etc. If you invest into that, I would then get a kickback if you use my code. So that's the read. That's how you'd say it. Again, in theory, it's an affiliate thing that someone happens to watch a video that you've created, perhaps been pushed out somewhere, and they'll go, oh, I'll use that code. And in theory, you get that 5%, it makes up 5% of my income. You get that small income bit come through. However, if you're doing affiliate income properly, it's not something you just like think about. I'm rubbish when it comes to affiliate income because I just slap it in a story and be like, right, this is going to be, kind of coming out. It's the last thing that I often think about in terms of affiliate income. If you're doing it properly, you should be using the same marketing strategies that you use for your own products, for sponsors, etc. You should be talking about it properly because then you get that kickback. Some people will say, well, they're not paying me for the video, so why should I? But then you could also argue that if you do it right, your affiliate income will be more than what you would get on a sponsored video. Pros and cons. And if you're then turning around and saying, oh, I know that I'm not going to get more income come from an affiliate income than I would from a sponsor, then you're probably charging your sponsors too much. Well, sorry, not sorry. Affiliate income, I've got a few different websites, different places that I go to and I use, that I'm then able to kind of go, right, I'm using this. Lots of people say, well, where did you get that from? I've actually got a discount code. It's a natural one. It's a natural one, but it's a passive income stream, but I don't think it's a passive income stream because there's work that you actually have to do. Alongside that, I have to send invoices to companies so that, if I've made X amount of sales on one platform, I have to send the invoice to a company and say, like, I've got this amount of signups.
Can you pay me the money? And then sometimes I have to chase that money up with the, depending on what the company is and things like that.
So that kind of brings me to the end of your general passive income streams. Of those, you can see the sponsors make up the biggest amount. I've had some incredible sponsors in the past who I've been able to work with. And if you wanna work with me, feel free to reach out. Digital products is a great one, and affiliate income again also great. We're gonna move into the green territory now. This is something I call true passive. I'm hoping that some of you don't see this as a bit of a cop-out because it's a really interesting one. But I need to split this into 3 now, as we should, in theory, if the math is right, we should be left with... I've always never good at modelling pie charts. It's not the most even, however.
So the first one that I want to talk about, representing 2.5%, is interest.
Interest. Now, for the sake of not making this a really complex pie chart full of my specifics, I've just left it at 2.5%. In reality, it's probably less. Interest obviously coming from banks. Interest is an interesting one because when you, excuse the pun, when you go over a certain threshold, you then have to pay tax on your interest amount, a bit like you would with all of the other ones. So yeah, interest is the only real one, except for a couple of others, that you can literally say you put money in a bank and yeah, you wake up and you're making money from the money that you've got in the bank. Do you need to do some admin? Yes, when you reach over a certain threshold. But yeah, it's one of those that's it's there. That's true passive. And then as a result, the other one, which should look like 2.5%, but it's a little bit bigger on this, is what I call, I'm wondering if this is all going to fit, dividends. And that is also 2.5%. Dividends are payouts that a company pays you. So I invest into lots of different ETFs. For both my interest and dividends, I use a platform called Trading 212. There's lots of different platforms available. I'm not a financial advisor. You should always seek your own financial advice. This is just what I do, and therefore, yeah, it's just for me to share with you. I have, in theory, a link into Trading 212 in the description for you to use. And different stocks pay out dividends based on the amount that you have. I have different ETFs, which stands for electronically tracked fund, and it's basically a way of investing into, it'd be a bit like this pie chart. Basically, if you look at the American market, it's the amount that you invest in certain companies. So it might be this amount. The big 40% is invested into like technology companies. I think it's actually more than that, and so on and so forth. So the way it represents that, and then those companies at specific points of the year pay out dividends, and then because I'm into an ETF, those dividends just get automatically put back into the amount that I own in those different ETFs and companies. If you have a different type of ETF or different types of shares, you will get that dividend come in. You also need to make sure that that's tracked, because there's a tax element and implication that's involved in that as well. Yeah, dividends is a really interesting one. It's the one that you do once and you set and forget, in theory. But there is also still that very small, I'd say far less admin than something like digital products and AdSense. But there is still that small amount of like looking, and perhaps when it comes to withdrawing bits and pieces, you still have to make sure that you're on it in terms of that. Final one is also supposed to be 2.5%. It looks a little bit bigger on this. Royalties. Excuse my handwriting. Royalties is where a company uses your bits, your assets, your visuals, your sound, and pay you to use those. So the way it's worked for me, this again, royalties dividends and interest, I would probably say it's less than 2.5%. But for the sake
Of making this a little bit easy to draw in my head, because otherwise I'd find it a bit of a struggle, I've kept it at that.
So royalties, I've worked with sponsors in the past and they've used different videos or created videos about a company, and they've turned around and said, well, can we use this in what they call meta ads? So I've said, yes, you can. However, you know, if you're going to be using my likeness to advertise something, I'd like royalties based on that. And so, yeah, that's become a thing where I get paid X amount for using the videos that I created in the past. So it's something that I've already generated income from. They're reusing it. So in theory, it's a lot more passive because it's not that back and forward. However, you would then turn around and say, well, I've still got to create the invoice. Could I automate it to make it even more passive? Maybe. But yeah. So that's an overall of my kind of income streams. I'd say there's a lot more active than there is passive. In the future, so as I'm speaking about this, it's pretty hard for you to kind of calculate an amount, and that's good. In the future, so this has been an income stream that I've spoken about for the last kind of 10 months, since January. We're now just about in November, so 11 months. I think it'd be really interesting to see what this looks like in the future. I'd be interested to know whether certain ones of these expand. I'd like teaching to expand. I'd like to be doing more teaching for sure. I can probably say, you know, like I said, some of these are less than 2.5%. I would probably say that's maybe a little bit more than 2.5%. Likewise with a digital product, I'd probably say a little bit more than 12.5%. But yeah, again, it's a bit hard to draw. I'd like teaching to expand. I'd like to be doing more teaching in classrooms. I miss it as I'm sat here at the moment on a Monday morning filming this. It's something I'd like to be doing more of, being in a classroom, because it's something that helps me feeling alive. I know that sounds a bit weird. But there's a fun element because you've got less kind of that responsibility to plan and do the admin side of things. Going in and actually teaching the lessons is completely different. Supply and being the full-time teacher is different, but yeah, it's something I'd like to expand. But obviously, as this expands, I'd like to see where maybe AdSense looks a little bit different, because there might be a podcast element. I'm not creating this podcast for monetary gain, although we are talking about money and we've spoken about what that might mean in terms of the podcast, in terms of CPMs and RPMs when you're talking about money. I'm not creating this for this reason. I just want to help teachers find the right direction. So podcasts would be an interesting one to see what kind of comes of that. Are there more sponsors? Is that an additional thing? But I think the biggest one is to kind of whether there's an extra chunk, because while I'm doing speaking for other companies, I'd like to be able to do my own webinars where I'm actually speaking and adding value about a specific topic. Digital products, then I guess you could start to look at like courses. Courses have had a bad rep recently because of certain people who sell those kind of like wishy-washy courses, life advice stuff, where it's like, yeah, really wishy-washy stuff that isn't actually useful. What I mean by digital courses is the types of stuff that you would typically take, where you typically have someone come and do some sort of CPD. I think you could do that really effectively and more engaging online, where you're actually able to interact with stuff. That'd be definite interesting one to kind of delve into and see what that looks like and see if that can expand. I think that's it really, is looking at getting digital products to expand even further and perhaps to take up more of my time, but also, yeah, revenue streams. So we'll see. We will see where this ends up in the future, what that looks like in the future. But I thought this would be a really interesting starting point of a podcast to kind of kickstart everything. I hope you found this useful. I've given lots of little nuggets and bits and pieces of information inside this podcast. And if you have found it interesting, feel free to leave a review, one of those 5-star ones. Feel free to follow the podcast, to subscribe to whatever you're viewing and watching this on. I hope you found the show really interesting and useful, because what we're doing is a little bit different. It's not on my lesson plan. See you in the next one.